sending me because I know you watching my live. I know you watching the live because you steadily sending me inboxes, bro. Like, it's cool, bro. I'm not, don't, because you gonna make me say your name, fam.
911, do you need police, fire, or medic?
I need police. Somebody just been shot in my house. I came home and I had a woman in my house and I pulled out my gun and I shot and she's not moved.
The person on this 911 call is 51-year-old Stephanie Alexander, a Charlotte woman who had no criminal record until that very day. On July 18, 2023, she would call the Mecklenburg Police Department to report herself. She had just shot someone dead in her own home. And who was this person, you might ask? It was her own husband's side chick, 25-year-old Tyra Crosby, a woman Stephanie claims was a stranger who had broken into her house. But what was more disturbing was Tyra's mother has an 8-minute voicemail recording from her daughter's phone that captures the sounds of her getting beaten, tormented, and threatened to be ended before the sound of gunshots was heard.
You sending me because I know you watching my live. I know you watching the live because you steadily sending me inboxes, bro. Like, it's cool, bro. I'm not, don't, because you gonna make me say your name, fam. You gonna make me say your name, bro. Like, don't stop inboxing me. For real, don't do that. Because now you making me mad, bro. Oh, God, like, that shit is uncalled for. Like, what? Like, I can talk about what the I want to talk about. This is my page, this is my life.
And this is a woman demanding answers, a woman exposing betrayal, a woman who believed she was finally taking control of a situation that had caused her pain. But in a matter of hours, that same confrontation would turn into a tragedy that left 4 children without their mother. Because on September 12, 2019, 31-year-old Sharon Miller walked into her boyfriend's apartment in Milwaukee to collect her belongings after publicly calling him out online. She walked in expecting an argument. She never expected that she would not walk back out alive. But before we get to that disturbing audio evidence Tyra's mother has and the courtroom battle that would follow, let me start you off with Sharon Miller's case. In Milwaukee, Wisconsin, there was a man living like nothing was wrong, dating a new woman, walking free, when in reality, he should have been locked up for several crimes he'd already been charged with. That man was Darnell Kimball, and the way he slipped back onto the streets is the kind of failure that makes you sick, because this wasn't just one mistake. This was a chain reaction of people whose job was to keep him behind bars, and every single one of them dropped the ball. By the time the system had gotten its last chance, the only person standing between Darnell and another victim's justice wasn't law enforcement at all. It was his own mother, who had spent years trying to keep him afloat and wasn't about to let that investment go to waste. And the person who paid the price for all of that failings was Sharon Miller, a 33-year-old mother of 4 who never realized the danger she was sleeping next to until it was far too late. So let's rewind, because to understand how he ended up in her bed, you have to see the crimes he'd already committed and the doors the system kept opening for him. Darnell Kimball was not some first offender who slipped through the cracks on a bad day. His record ran back more than 10 years, all the way back to his early adulthood years, and it went from bad to worse very quickly. All the way back in 2009, it started off with armed robbery. That was the start of a pattern, because by the time Darnell was 30 years old, he was a repeat visitor in the criminal books. By 2017, he was facing battery and disorderly conduct charges. Just a year later, at 2018, he was arrested again, this time for possession of illegal substances. But that same year, things took a darker turn. This time, Darnell wasn't just caught with substance, he was accused of something far chilling. In 2018, just a year before he would brutally take the life of Sharon, in 2018, he killed someone by holding their neck and cutting off their air supply. Now, this is the part I can't wrap my head around, because this was a homicide crime, and Darnell got to walk free because a key witness did not show up in court. Without that testimony, prosecutors couldn't move forward, and the charges didn't stick. Think about that progression for a minute. This is a man who had gone from robbery to chaos to substances and then to murder. Each step escalated, each arrest another warning sign. Yet somehow, despite this trail of these several charges, Darnell kept finding his way back onto the streets. Now we have to talk about the woman whose family would end up bearing the burnt part of Darnell's horrifying list of crimes, someone who had no clue any of this was about to take her life.
Born on July 3, 1998, Sharon was raised by her mother, Jacqueline Brinson. Much of her early childhood and family life remained private, but those closest to her described her as someone who was impossible to ignore. She was outspoken, she was honest, and she had a personality that made you stop and stare.
Do all this. I ain't nobody. Ain't nobody getting this. You got to be doing this for me and that for me. And I'm focused on my money. I don't got time for no bullshit. We women, it's scientifically proven that we hornier than we think about more than this.
Sharon was not the type of person to hide how she felt. Whether she was happy, angry, or frustrated, she expressed herself openly, especially online, where she shared pieces of her life. Her Facebook page became an extension of who she was, a place where she shared her thoughts, her opinions, and moments with the people she cared about. But behind the strong personality was a woman who was constantly working towards something better. Sharon wanted stability, she wanted success, and she wanted to create a future for herself and her children. So she enrolled at ITT Technical Institute, studying Network and Systems Administration, hoping to build a career that would provide more opportunities for her family. Outside of school, Sharon also had a creative side. Tattoo artistry became one of her biggest passions. She developed her skills and then eventually worked as a tattoo artist at Nocturnal Ink and Body Canvas Ink. She also worked at Go Right Way Transportation Group, balancing multiple responsibilities while raising her children. Sharon was a mother of 4 lovely children.
He came out of me. Look at him. Look at her. Look at her. Say hey, Mackenzie. Smile, let them see your dimples. This is a product of me. I did this. Look, I made this. I made this. Look at these motherfuckers. Look at that. Look how beautiful he is. I made these motherfuckers. And then you see that motherfucker back there asleep? That little bad motherfucker. I'm going to go around and put the camera on him too. Hold on. I don't got no viewers right now, but I'm still going to talk my shit. You see this motherfucker right here? I made that beautiful motherfucker with this pussy. You see that shit?
But while Sharon was building a life for her children, she was also searching for love. And unfortunately, that search would lead her to someone who would eventually destroy everything she had worked so hard to protect. That person was Darnell Kimball, but Sharon did not know the full extent of the man she was becoming involved with. She had no idea this was someone whose criminal record stretched many years and a dead victim in a case that was still sitting hot on a plate. And less than 4 months of walking free, all that history was about to come crashing down on her. On the morning of September 12, 2019, the Milwaukee Police Department received an urgent 911 call from a home near 52nd and Locust. That call came from inside the house of Darnell Kimball, but it wasn't him who dialed. It was his own mother, frantic, begging for help. Now, I know you're wondering what happened. Hold on, because we'll get there in a moment. When officers arrived, they walked into a scene that would haunt them. Lying inside was 31-year-old Sharon Miller, a mother of 4, suffering from gunshot wounds to her arm and abdomen. She was rushed to the hospital, doctors fighting to save her life. But despite every effort, Sharon's injuries were too severe. Just after midnight, around 1 a.m. on September 13th, she was pronounced dead. Think about that. a young mother gone in less than 24 hours in the home of the man she thought she knew. And the person who made the desperate call for help wasn't a neighbor or a passerby, it was his own mother. Now, before we dive into the chaos of that night, let me lay out the timeline for you. Because to understand how Sharon ended up shot in her boyfriend's home with his mother dialing 911, you need to see the chain of events that led to this moment. Sharon had no idea she was walking straight into a relationship built on lies. To her, Darnell looked like stability, but what she didn't know was she wasn't the only woman in his life. In fact, she wasn't even the main one. She had become the side chick in a relationship that was already spoken for. One of Darnell's biggest secrets was that he was married, legally attached to another woman the entire time. And when Sharon finally uncovered that truth, everything exploded. The betrayal hit her like a speeding train. She had already endured arguments and disagreements that should have ended things long before, but she stayed, hoping for better. Finding out now that there was another woman, a wife, that was the breaking point. Sharon wasn't the type to quietly walk away. She was outspoken, confrontational, and when she felt wronged, she made sure the world knew about it.
Sending me because I know you watching my live. I know you watching the live because you steadily sending me inboxes, bro. Like, it's cool, bro. Don't, because you gonna make me say your name, fam. You gonna make me say your name, bro. Like, don't, stop inboxing me. For real, don't do that. Because now you making me mad, bro. Oh, God, like, that shit is uncause for. Like, what? Like, I can talk about what the I want to talk about. This is my page, this is my life.
So instead of keeping her anger private, Sharon went to the one place she could speak her mind freely, Facebook. She ranted about Darnell's betrayal, and once she realized he was watching her posts, she went even harder. She expressed her anger and hurt, calling Darnell a liar and a manipulator. She even threatened to expose the affair publicly on her live stream. Sharon was done, and she wanted Darnell to know it. But here's the chilling reality. No argument, no insult, no Facebook rant, and no public embarrassment could ever justify what is about to happen. On the morning of September 12, 2019, Sharon Miller walked into Darnell Kimball's home on 52nd and Locust in Milwaukee. She wasn't there to fight. She wasn't there to argue. She was there for one reason: to collect her things and finally leave. This was supposed to be the end. Sharon was ready to walk away for good, but Darnell wasn't about to let her go so easily. He was still boiling with anger over the things Sharon had said on Facebook, the threats, the rants, the humiliation. Those words had pushed him over the edge, and when she showed up that morning, the tension exploded into a loud, heated argument. What was said between them in those final moments may never be known, but what happened next was chilling. According to authorities, the confrontation escalated when Sharon moved toward Darnell during the argument. Within seconds, he pulled out a firearm and opened fire. The bullets struck her in the arm and abdomen, dropping her inside the apartment. As Sharon collapsed, fighting for her life, Darnell fled. He ran out of the home, leaving her bleeding on the floor, not even stopping to see if she would survive. But there was someone else inside that house, someone who saw everything: Darnell's own mother. She witnessed the shouting, the moment her son allegedly pulled the trigger, and the aftermath of her son's rage. And now she was faced with an impossible decision: protect her son or tell the truth about what she had just seen. With an eyewitness in the room and a suspect already identified, it looked like justice for Sharon Miller would come quickly. On paper, this seemed like a straightforward case, but this would become one of the most frustrating battles her family would ever face. A battle where the truth was known, but proving it in court became far more complicated. And Sharon's mother, Jacqueline Brinson, summed up the pain better than anybody could.
I never imagined losing my child, at such a young age.
Jacqueline Brinson remembers the memories made with her daughter, Sharon Miller.
I could skate, but she could skate better than me. So I would be on the side of her to make it seem as if I was just as good as her.
Miller skated through life with a full focus on her 4 young children.
She had a great relationship with them.
Darnell Kimball was charged with first-degree reckless homicide and possession of a firearm by a felon. For Sharon's family, this was the first step toward accountability. They believed the man responsible would finally have to answer for what happened. But here's where the case took a devastating twist. The person who could potentially put Darnell behind bars forever wasn't a stranger. It was the person closest to him, his own mother. Because coming forward meant helping secure justice for Sharon, but it also meant sending her own son to prison for years, maybe for life. As the trial approached, prosecutors believed her testimony would be the cornerstone of their case. She was the one person who could describe what happened inside that apartment better than anyone else. She had seen the shouting, the confrontation, and the moment the gun went off. And yet, the question hung heavy in the air. Would a mother really testify against her own son? When the case was set to move forward, the most important witness, Darnell's own mother, didn't show up in court. The one person who had seen the shooting unfold, the one voice prosecutors were counting on, was suddenly gone. Without her testimony, the case began to fall like a pack of dominoes. Just like before, prosecutors were left with a devastating problem. How do you prove what happened inside that apartment without the eyewitness account? The defense now had an opening, and questions swirled about whether there was enough evidence to convince a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. By November 2020, the charges against Darnell Kimball were dismissed without prejudice. That meant prosecutors could bring the case back in the future, but for Sharon's family, the result was heartbreaking. The man they believed was responsible for her death was walking free yet again.
The man accused of killing a woman nearly 4 years ago is charged again. Fox 6's Bill Miston joins us live. Bill, the original case here was dismissed, and my understanding, this all came down to one key witness.
Yeah, a witness who never showed up. That's why Darnell Kimball's homicide trial went out the window several years ago. Right now, prosecutors aren't saying what changed, but the refiling of charges signals that prosecutors are ready to take the case to trial again.
And while the homicide charges collapsed, Darnell was still convicted of felon in possession of a firearm. But even then, the punishment fell short. He received a stayed sentence and 2 years of probation, meaning the judge technically imposed prison time, but chose not to enforce it as long as Darnell followed certain conditions. So instead of being locked away, he was back on the streets, a man with a history of armed robbery, battery, illegal substance possession, and now a 2 times dismissed homicide case, still free in Milwaukee. For Sharon's family, it was another crushing blow. The system had failed them once more, allowing Darnell Kimball to slip through the cracks when by all accounts he should have been behind bars long before he ever crossed paths with Sharon. For Jacqueline Brinson, Sharon's mother, the pain was unbearable. She struggled to understand how someone accused of taking her daughter's life could walk out of a courtroom without a conviction.
He literally shot and murdered my daughter, and he's walking free. Free as me and you, and she's no longer with us.
And for years, that's exactly how it looked. The case seemed frozen, unresolved, fading into silence. But then, nearly 4 years later, everything changed. In May 2023, the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office refiled charges against Darnell Kimball, once again accusing him of first-degree reckless homicide in connection with Sharon's death. A new warrant was issued, and suddenly a case many believed had disappeared was alive again.
31-year-old Sherrod Miller was shot in the arm and abdomen inside an apartment near 52nd and Locust in 2019. Miller died hours later.
She was just an outgoing, loving person, and I'm really going to miss her. She has beautiful children that are really going to miss her.
The medical examiner's office ruled her death a homicide. Prosecutors charged Kimball days later with killing the mother of 4. Investigators say Kimball's mother witnessed her son shoot Miller, but when a witness no-showed at trial, Kimball was released. For years, the case went dormant. During that time, Kimball was convicted of felony gun possession, given a stayed sentence, and put on 2 years probation. On Tuesday, prosecutors filed first-degree reckless homicide and felony gun charges against Kimball. A warrant's out for his arrest.
Fast forward to February 2026. After years of waiting, years of heartbreak, a jury finally delivered its verdict. Darnell Kimball was found guilty of first-degree reckless homicide and felon in possession of a firearm. Now he awaits sentencing. Under Wisconsin law, first-degree reckless homicide is a Class B felony, punishable by decades in prison, depending on prior record and enhancements. For Sharon's family, the conviction was a step toward accountability, but the reality remained painfully clear. They had lost their daughter, they had lost their mother, and even with the verdict, they were still waiting for the one thing they had wanted from the very beginning: justice that feels complete. That was Sharon's story, a woman failed by the system before she ever met the man who took her life.
With this lady, Miss Miller, she ended up losing her life, okay? And I watched her live. It's like 5 or 6 different parts. And she was exposing the things that he was doing to her in the bedroom. She still was calling the wife a big bag, and you don't even like your wife, and you don't like this, and you don't like that. That wife don't have nothing to do with the decisions that her husband make. Now, again, everybody lose in this whole situation. This girl got 4 kids, and she's not going to be here to raise them. He's gone, and the wife is probably out here somewhere embarrassed, okay, at the same time, that she don't have anything to do with this. She also said that she had been inside their home, and that's when she found out that they was married. And when you found out that day, that was the day that you should have ended that relationship. Okay? And again, a man gonna tell you, oh, I'm not happy. He may talk about that woman, he may do all that, but he not gonna leave that woman.
Our next story is different, because this time the person with the gun had 0 criminal record. However, on July 18, 2023, at around 5:30 that morning, Stephanie would make an unsettling 911 call to report that she had just shot someone dead in her home.
911, do you need police, fire, or medic?
I need police. Somebody just been shot in my house. I came home and I had a woman in my house, and I pulled out my gun and I shot, and she's not moved.
And the victim? Her own husband's side chick, 25-year-old Tyra Crosby, who had broken into her house. At first, it sounded like a story that almost wrote itself. A wife comes home early in the morning, walks into her house, finds a stranger inside, grabs her gun, and claims she acted in a moment of panic. But here's where this whole thing doesn't make sense, because Stephanie claims it happened out of panic. But Tyra had sent her mother a voicemail recording of Stephanie beating, torturing, and threatening her for 8 whole minutes before taking her life. Because once you hear what really happened inside that house, you'll realize this wasn't just a break-in, it was the beginning of a nightmare. Let me take you back to the very beginning. 25-year-old Tyra Crosby met Albert Alexander on the evening 18th of July 2023 in Charlotte, North Carolina. Both individuals had met in a gambling arcade on North Tryon Street. They strike up a conversation, the kind that feels casual at first, but it quickly turns into something more. One thing led to another, and Albert invited Tyra back to his place. This was a harmless act. After all, these are 2 adults with the power of making decisions for themselves. But here's the twist that would change what would later happen. Tyra had no idea Albert was a married man. None at all. Tyra's GPS trail would later show that this was the first and only time Tyra had visited Albert's home on Porter Street. She wasn't sneaking around in some affair. She wasn't chasing a married man. She was walking into a situation she couldn't possibly see coming.
Now, the timeline is where things gets a little more sensitive. Stephanie Alexander, Albert's wife, worked the night shift. She wasn't supposed to be home at 5 in the morning, but that night she came back early. A class assignment had forced her to cut her shift short. She opened the door to her own house and immediately felt it. Something was off. Clothes she didn't recognize draped across the couch, strange sounds coming from the bedroom, and then the sight that would change everything. Her husband, Albert, with another woman. While we may not know exactly what happened after that, but from the voicemail recording recovered later, the situation immediately turned to chaos. Stephanie's own 911 call later revealed the tragic chain of events. She claimed she grabbed her gun, demanded to know who was hiding in her home, and then she fired toward the bathroom door, where Tyra had fled for safety after seeing her. Now, this is the part I want you to digest. Albert, Stephanie's husband, would later tell the police that he had tried to wrestle the gun away from his wife. He even claimed he thought Stephanie only wanted to scare Tyra, not actually pull the trigger. But Tyra, a young woman who had no idea she'd walked into someone else's marriage, was about to pay the ultimate price for a fight that wasn't hers. Stephanie had shot Tyra at that moment, because by the time she made the 911 call for emergency responders and they arrived, 25-year-old Tyra Crosby was already laying on the floor with a bullet wound. Tyra Crosby was born on August 28, 1997. Everyone who knew her said she carried an energy that drew people in. Her mother, Tanya Hoskins, remembers her as the kind of person who loved to have fun. She was outgoing, spontaneous, caring, and deeply nurturing. Tyra wasn't just dreaming about her future, she was building it. She had launched her own clothing line, carving out a path that showed ambition and independence. But on that warm July night, that one decision changed everything. Tyra chose to go home with a man she had just met, a choice so ordinary that millions of people make it every single day without a second thought. For Tyra, though, that decision would prove fatal. Within hours, her life was gone. And as the news of what happened spread, the internet did what the internet often does. It reduced Tyra to a headline. Posts began circulating, branding her as nothing more than a side chick to a married man. But Tanya Hoskins refused to let her daughter's story be flattened into gossip. Tyra was more than that label, more than the cruel shorthand strangers used to define her.
She was so spontaneous, always caring, so loving to me, and I miss that about her.
Now let's get back to the horrifying crime itself, because this would be a roller coaster of Stephanie's version of events. In a portion of the 911 calls which were later made public, Stephanie can be heard describing what she saw when she walked into her home.
How old is she? I have no idea. I don't even know the woman. She's inside my house in the hallway on the floor.
Is she flat on her back?
No, she's on her stomach. I can try to move her on her back. My husband told me don't touch her. Oh God, what did I do? What did I do?
While Stephanie sounded shocked and confused, she was also framing the situation as if she had stumbled into a home invasion, a stranger trespassing in her space. But this is where the evidence cuts through her claims. What Stephanie didn't realize was that Tyra had accidentally pocket-dialed her mother, Tanya, and that call was still recording. It was 8 minutes of audio. 8 minutes that Tanya, Tyra's mother, would later describe as the most haunting sound she'd ever heard. Her daughter being beaten, tortured, and threatened with death. Listen to how Tanya Hoskins remembers that recording.
I'm angry, I'm upset that for her to go from one emotion to the next, you get on the 911 call and I have a call recorded on my phone where you're beating my child, and then you call 911 and you're emotionally crying and saying your life is over.
According to that audio evidence, what happened inside Stephanie's home wasn't quick. There had been a confrontation, there were threats, possible physical attack before the gunshot was heard.
But Stephanie's 911 paints a very different picture. Her voice is trembling, panicked, almost broken.
Oh God, what did I do? What did I do?
To anyone hearing that call, it sounded like a woman who had just acted out of fear, someone who didn't mean to do what she had done. Stephanie was arrested by Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department at the scene and charged with voluntary manslaughter, which means it acknowledges that she killed someone, but it also argues that it happened in the heat of passion without a premeditation. Her bond was also set at $250,000. And here's the thing about how bonds actually work, because most people hear a big number and assume the accused has to come up with all of it, but that's not how it plays out. In reality, you don't pay the full amount. You typically only put up about 10 to 15% of the total bond through a bondsman, which means that for Stephanie's bond set at $250,000, she's really looking at something closer to $15,000 out of pocket. So think about that. For the price of a used car, a woman accused of killing someone was able to buy her way back onto the street. To Tyra Crosby's family, it wasn't just about the bond. It was about the message it sent, that even in a case involving torture, threats, and a fatal shooting, money could open the door and set the accused free before the family had even buried their daughter. However, with the audio evidence, the voicemail, and the contradictions between her call and Tyra's recording, prosecutors now had to decide, was this truly manslaughter or was it murder? And then came the moment that enraged Tyra Crosby's entire family, because by 8:30 that same night, less than 6 hours after she shot Tyra dead, Stephanie posted bond and walked out of jail.
My daughter at 5 a.m. and she was out at 8 p.m. So that means that human life means nothing anymore.
For Tyra's mother, Tanya Hoskins, this was unacceptable. She wasn't about to let the case fade quietly. She had the audio evidence, the chilling recording Tyra left behind, and she was determined to make sure investigators heard every second of it.
I want it to be known, if me or you kill somebody, we have to stand the consequence, and we can't vow out on a crime of passion.
Tanya handed the recording over to Charlotte Mecklenburg Police Department, hoping it would change everything. She wanted Stephanie charged with first-degree murder. She wanted justice for her daughter. To Tanya, this clearly wasn't a crime of passion. It was murder, cold-blooded murder. She also told reporters she's not stopping until Stephanie is charged again.
I don't want the investigators to go away. I won't stop until there's another charge.
Criminal defense attorney Mark Jayton, who wasn't involved in the case but analyzed the 911 audio, noted that Stephanie was shaking beyond belief on that call.
She's shaking beyond belief. You can hear that, you can hear the things she's saying. It certainly seems to be the charge that you would assume is correct. Now, the tricky part is just because it's a heat of passion situation doesn't always mean manslaughter is the correct charge. Time is one of the main factors that we deal with as between manslaughter and murder, because time can equal premeditation.
Based on what he heard, he suggested that the manslaughter charge seemed appropriate. But then he said something crucial, something that cuts to the heart of this case. Just because it's a heat of passion situation doesn't always mean manslaughter is the correct charge. Time is one of the main factors we deal with between manslaughter and murder, because time can equal premeditation. And that's the chilling question. How much time really passed between finding Tyra and pulling the trigger? Because if there was time, if there was space for threats, for torture, for decisions, then this wasn't just panic. It could point to something far darker.
Meanwhile, Tanya's relentless advocacy was beginning to pay off, because on August 3, 2023, a Mecklenburg County jury reviewed the evidence, including that haunting 8-minute voicemail Tyra left behind, and made a stunning decision. The charges against Stephanie Alexander were officially upgraded to second-degree murder. This was huge. Second-degree murder carries far harsher penalties than voluntary manslaughter. It doesn't just suggest a heat-of-the-moment reaction, it points to malice, to intentional harm. For Tanya, it was vindication, proof that the audio evidence revealed something far more sinister than Stephanie's trembling 911 call had suggested.
But even with upgraded charges, Tanya wasn't satisfied. She wanted more. She wanted first-degree murder, a charge that requires proof of premeditation. In her eyes, Tyra hadn't just stumbled into danger, she had been lured to that house. Tyra was innocent. She didn't know Albert was married, and she died in a situation she never should have been in. On July 23, 2023, a candlelight vigil was organized by Mothers of Murder to Our Strength at Camp Green Park to honor the memory of Tyra. The group supports families who've lost loved ones to violence. One attendee captured Tyra's spirit perfectly.
It was beautiful. Her soul, her spirit, inside and out.
She gonna be our angel on our shoulder.
She always knew what to say.
Lighting candles and prayers and releasing balloons, trying to deal with the pain of her death, including her mother, who was the last to light a candle in her memory.
Just to see how many lives she touched and the love that she had in her heart.
Then something unsettling happened that shook the entire neighborhood. Just 9 days after Tyra's death, on July 27th of that same year, gunfire erupted at the same Porter Street home around 2 in the morning. One person was injured. Police responded quickly, but they couldn't find any definitive connection to Tyra's case. Still, the timing was impossible to ignore.
Now, everybody's shooting. We got drive-by shootings. You hear it all the time. And you hear it back here in that warehouse back there. They be back there shooting, racing cars in the parking lot.
Neighbors were rattled. The Alexander home had now been ground zero for violence twice in less than 2 weeks. Safety concerns skyrocketed, and the community was left wondering if this tragedy was spiraling into something even bigger. Meanwhile, the case wound its way through the legal system for over a year, and during that time, Stephanie Alexander remained out on bond, living her life, while Tyra Crosby lay in a grave. For Tanya Hoskins, Tyra's mother, the grief was unbearable. She had now lost her 3rd child to violence, 1 in an accident, 2 to gunfire.
She tells me this is her 3rd child that she has lost in a tragic way. 1 was killed in an accident. Now 2 of her children have died by gun violence.
Then came December 5th, 2024. Stephanie Alexander appeared in court for what everyone expected would finally be the trial on the second-degree murder charge. But trials are unpredictable. Evidence can be interpreted in different ways. And Stephanie's defense team had something powerful on their side. She was a 51-year-old woman with no record of criminal history, and her attorneys argued that walking in to find her husband with another woman triggered a momentary loss of control, the kind of emotional storm that could make jurors see her not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a wife pushed past her breaking point. So instead of going to trial, Stephanie Alexander pleaded guilty to manslaughter. The charge was downgraded from second-degree murder back to manslaughter, though sources still differ on whether it was voluntary or involuntary manslaughter. She was eventually sentenced to 60 to 84 months in prison. That's an unbelievable 5 to 7 years for taking a life. In court, Stephanie apologized to Crosby's family. She expressed remorse and acknowledged what she'd done. But for Tanya Hoskins, Tyra's mother, it wasn't nearly enough.
To her, the woman she believed had murdered her daughter in cold blood was walking away with what felt like a slap on the wrist. And then, in a moment that encapsulates just how raw emotions still were, a physical altercation broke out in the courtroom. Albert Alexander, Stephanie's husband, got into a scuffle with one of Tyra's family members. Multiple Mecklenburg County deputies had to step in and break it up. Even at sentencing, even after a plea deal, the anger and grief were too much to contain.
Tanya Hoskins spoke publicly after the sentencing, and her frustration was palpable. Tanya's words echoed the sentiment she'd shared from the beginning. Human life means nothing anymore.
She killed my baby in cold blood. She killed her at 4 a.m. and she was out at 8 p.m., meaning that human life have no value.
The plea deal, in her view, confirmed that the system didn't value Tyra's life the way it should have. That you could kill someone, claim heat of passion, and be back on the streets in 5 years. But here's where this case becomes even more complicated. Because while Tanya sees cold-blooded murder, the legal system sees something different. Voluntary manslaughter acknowledges that Stephanie killed Tyra, but argues there was no premeditation. And the 8-minute audio recording that Tanya describes as torture, it's not clear how much weight it carried in the final plea negotiations or whether it was determined to be admissible at trial. Let's talk about the other person in this story who's barely been mentioned, Albert Alexander, the husband. The man at the center of it all, the one who set this entire chain of events in motion by inviting Tyra Crosby into his home. He was there during the shooting. He even claimed to have tried to wrestle the gun away from his wife. And yet, he didn't face any charges. This was something Tanya Hoskins kept hitting on again and again. To Tanya, that detail mattered. Tyra hadn't forced her way in. She hadn't crept into the house uninvited. She was brought there by Albert, and that made the tragedy even harder to accept. As of today, no appeals or further legal actions have been reported. Stephanie Alexander is serving her sentence. Albert Alexander has remained largely silent in public, and Tanya Hoskins is left to grieve for a daughter who went out one night, met someone at an arcade, and never came home. I like the contrast you're going for. The strongest transition is to emphasize that in Tyra's case, the danger came from someone she barely knew, but in Sierra's case, it came from someone she thought she knew better than almost anyone. This case leaves behind so many questions that don't have easy answers. Should Albert Alexander have faced charges for his role in creating the situation? Or was he simply another witness caught in the chaos? And most importantly, was this truly a crime of passion, or was it premeditated murder? What's clear is that for Tanya, for Tyra's family, and for the community, the scars of this case run deep, and the lingering doubts about accountability may never fully fade. But if there's one thing Tyra Crosby's story reminds us, it's that sometimes the greatest danger comes from the people we barely know. However, this next case is the complete opposite. This time, the person responsible wasn't the jealous wife of a man Sierra had just started seeing. It was the man himself, a man Sierra Jameson had trusted for nearly 10 years. And what makes her story even more heartbreaking is that Sierra had already survived one violent attack. She had fought off an armed attacker at a gas station, lived to tell the story, and even used her experience to speak out about the violence women face every day.
I guess because we women and they don't think that we're easy to target. I guess that's the situation. I guess that's the issue, because we'll probably be more vulnerable to give up and let go or whatever the case may be.
After everything she had already overcome, you would think the worst was behind her. But the person who would eventually take her life wasn't a stranger in a parking lot. It was someone who convinced her to give a relationship a chance. That relationship lasted just 1 month. And when Sierra decided it wasn't working, he made sure she would never get the chance to walk away again. Sierra wasn't someone who let hardship define her. She was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois, a city that has long struggled with violent crime, despite recent improvements in homicide rates. It was a tough place to build a future, but Sierra was determined to do exactly that. She worked hard, stayed focused, and always had another goal waiting on the horizon.
Say hello. What? Where you at, Coco?
After finishing school, she began working in healthcare, a career she took great pride in because it allowed her to help people every single day. But she wasn't satisfied with stopping there. She had already started preparing for nursing school, determined to create an even better future for herself and the people who depended on her. And no one motivated her more than her little boy. Her 6-year-old son had already faced challenges that most adults couldn't imagine. He had been diagnosed with autism and had undergone open-heart surgery at an incredibly young age. Watching him fight through those obstacles only made Sierra work harder.
And my Jeep, my Wrangler, that was something for a gift for myself because I know how hard I worked for it. I know how many sacrifices I've done for my family, my son, because he's been through a lot. My son had open heart surgery. He has a disability, so he means a lot to me. And I'm not finna let this young man with a knife at that take anything I work hard away from me.
To everyone around her, Sierra looked like someone whose life was finally falling into place. What no one realized is that she had already survived one violent attack, and that terrifying experience would unknowingly become the first chapter in an even darker story.
The incident happened in 2022. Sierra had stopped at a gas station like she'd done countless times before. It was supposed to be a routine stop. Fill up the tank, get back on the road, and head home. Instead, a man walked up to her holding a kitchen knife. He demanded her car keys and threatened her life. For most people, that kind of encounter would trigger pure panic. But Sierra noticed something. As the man stood in front of her, she realized he looked nervous. He kept flinching, almost as if he wasn't expecting her to fight back. That split-second observation changed everything. Instead of surrendering, Sierra made a decision that may have saved her life. Nearby, 2 women had noticed what was happening. Rather than driving away or pretending not to see it, they rushed over to help. Sierra later remembered asking one of them for a baseball bat that was sitting in her trunk. Armed with the bat and encouraged by the 2 strangers standing beside her, she confronted the attacker. Suddenly, the man who had approached her with a knife wasn't so confident anymore. He turned around and ran. Later, Sierra reflected on that day during a television interview.
You got some women that's out here that go stand their ground and fight. Cause it was the young lady that was in front of me and them lady that was at the pump 1. They helped me. I wasn't just by myself. They literally stepped in and helped me. It was a lot of black empowerment, women empowerment that day. Cause they could have left. They could have just mind their business, but they know. They stood right there and they helped me, and I'm impressed.
Then she smiled before adding something that, looking back now, is almost impossible to hear without feeling emotional.
I'm grateful. I went home to my son. I thank God every day that I'm here.
Thankfully, police eventually tracked the suspect down. He was convicted of attempted aggravated vehicular hijacking and sentenced to 4 years in prison. For Sierra, that chapter seemed over. She had survived. She had gone home to her son. She had been given another chance. But instead of trying to forget what happened, she decided to use her experience to help other women. Only a few weeks before her death, Sierra sat down with a local news station to talk openly about the violence Black women continue to face and why she believed so many of them become targets.
My thoughts are that it's like, I don't know why a lot of people want to target young women. I guess because we women and they don't think that we're easy to target. I guess that's the situation. I guess that's the issue, because we'll probably be more vulnerable to give up and let go or whatever the case may be.
She wanted women to stay alert. She wanted them to fight if they could. She wanted people to understand that these attacks weren't isolated incidents. She had no way of knowing that while she was encouraging other women to watch out for strangers, the greatest danger in her own life wasn't a stranger at all. It was someone whose name had been in her phone for years. His name was Lawrence Boyle. For nearly a decade, Lawrence wasn't just another acquaintance. He was one of Sierra's closest friends. The two had known each other for years, building a friendship that, at least from the outside, seemed completely ordinary. If someone had asked Sierra who she felt safest around, Lawrence probably would have been one of the last people anyone expected her to fear. And maybe that's exactly why she never saw what was coming. Because sometime around August of 2023, something changed. After years of being just friends, Lawrence decided he wanted more. He told Sierra he wanted a relationship. At first, the idea didn't seem unreasonable. After all, people hear stories all the time about lifelong friends falling in love. Who better to date than someone who already knew your strengths, your flaws, your family, and your dreams? For Sierra, giving the relationship a chance probably felt like a natural next step. But almost immediately, she realized she had made a mistake. The man she had trusted as a friend turned out to be a completely different person as a boyfriend. The change was impossible to ignore. Lawrence became controlling, possessive, and overbearing. It didn't take long for Sierra to realize this wasn't the relationship she wanted. So, after only about a month together, she ended it. To Sierra, it was simply the end of a relationship that wasn't working. To Lawrence, it was something he refused to accept. The breakup may have lasted only a few weeks, but for Lawrence, it became an obsession. The more Sierra tried to move on, the more he seemed unable to do the same. And as investigators would later piece together his past, they discovered this wasn't the first time chaos had followed him. Years before Sierra ever agreed to date him, Lawrence had already accumulated a troubling criminal history. In 2011, he was charged with domestic misbehavior and aggravated misconduct with a deadly weapon. Although that particular case was eventually dropped, it wasn't the end of his encounters with the justice system. Records also showed previous convictions involving child misconduct as well as breaking and entering. Taken separately, those incidents might have seemed like isolated mistakes. Together, they painted the picture of someone who struggled with anger, control, and rejection. Unfortunately, Sierra didn't know just how dangerous that history could become. To her, Lawrence was still the man she'd known for nearly 10 years.
Records uncovered by the CBS 2 investigators show Boyle had a previous 2011 domestic violence aggravated assault with a deadly weapon arrest and was charged in March of that year. A month later, the case was dropped. Boyle was also convicted in 1993 of child abuse in North Carolina, and 6 years later was out of prison by 1999. In court, it was also revealed Boyle served 2 years for breaking and entering in the North Carolina Department of Corrections and had a 1997 misdemeanor conviction for assault on a woman.
She believed ending the relationship would be uncomfortable, but temporary. She expected hurt feelings, maybe a few awkward conversations, perhaps even the end of their friendship. She never imagined it would become a death sentence. For Lawrence, rejection wasn't simply something to accept and move past. It became something to punish. As September 18, 2013 came to an end, Sierra followed the same routine she had followed so many times before. She drove home, opened the garage, and parked her Jeep. What she didn't know was that someone was already waiting inside. According to prosecutors, Lawrence had gone there ahead of her arrival and hidden inside the garage. He wasn't there by accident. He was waiting for Sierra to come home, waiting until she was completely alone. When she stepped out of her vehicle, Lawrence confronted her. Prosecutors would later reveal something chilling about those first moments. Initially, Lawrence believed Sierra might have been carrying a gun, but when he realized she wasn't armed, he attacked. He wrapped his hands around her neck and began to restrict her airflow. Sierra fought for her life, but Lawrence didn't stop. According to prosecutors, he continued holding her until she lost consciousness, and even then he kept going. He didn't release his grip until he was convinced she was no longer breathing. But Lawrence wasn't finished. Instead of calling for help, instead of checking whether she was still alive, he began covering up what he had done. He took Sierra's cell phone, trying to erase one of the quickest ways investigators could trace what had happened. Then he dragged a green tarp over her body, hiding her beneath it inside the same garage where she had parked only minutes before. To anyone walking by, nothing appeared unusual. The garage door was closed. After covering her body, Lawrence calmly left the scene. Witnesses would later report seeing him leaving the area shortly after the attack. But what happened next made the situation even more disturbing. As he was closing the garage door, he met Sierra's brother. He had come looking for her as she wasn't answering her phone. When he asked Lawrence if he knew where Sierra was, Lawrence didn't panic. He didn't run. He lied. According to prosecutors, he claimed Sierra had thrown her phone at him before leaving for the store. It sounded believable enough to buy him a little more time that kept anyone from immediately searching the garage. But as the evening wore on, something didn't feel right. Sierra was still not answering her phone. She wasn't responding to messages. For someone as devoted to her family, and especially to her son, that simply wasn't normal. Her mother began to worry. At first, she probably hoped there was a simple explanation. Maybe her phone had died. Maybe she was caught up doing something. Then she decided to check the garage herself. What she found would become the worst moment of her life. Hidden beneath a green tarp was her daughter's body. Just days earlier, they had celebrated Sierra's 30th birthday together. Now, instead of planning the next chapter of Sierra's life, her family was forced to begin planning a funeral. As news of the killing spread, local media quickly descended on Chicago's Park Manor neighborhood. What made the case especially heartbreaking wasn't just how Sierra died. It was who investigators believed had killed her. According to prosecutors, Sierra had been murdered by someone she trusted, someone she had known for nearly a decade, someone who had recently gone from being a longtime friend to a boyfriend, and now her alleged killer. As detectives worked to reconstruct Lawrence's movements, another major development unfolded.
Only hours after killing Sierra, Lawrence contacted someone from his past, his ex-wife. According to prosecutors, during that conversation, Lawrence admitted exactly what he had done. That phone call would later become one of the strongest pieces of evidence showing he fully understood the gravity of his actions. But what happened next surprised many people following the case. Instead of trying to flee the state, instead of disappearing, Lawrence eventually made the decision to turn himself in. On September 20th, 2023, just 2 days after Sierra's murder, he walked into a police station and surrendered without incident. He was arrested and formally charged with first-degree murder. As investigators dug deeper into his background, details of his past quickly resurfaced. His previous arrests, his history of violence, his prior convictions. The public began asking the same question. How had someone with a history like this ended up so close to Sierra? Just weeks after they began dating, she was dead. On September 22nd, Lawrence made his first court appearance. Prosecutors laid out their version of what happened inside that garage. They told the judge that Lawrence had waited for Sierra to come home, that he ambushed her, and that he continued to restrict her airflow even after she lost consciousness. They also addressed what they believed would become one of the defense's arguments, self-defense. According to prosecutors, there was no evidence to support that claim. They argued that Sierra wasn't armed, and the physical evidence, including injuries to her neck from the act rather than a struggle over a weapon. The judge agreed there was no basis to release him. Lawrence was ordered held without bail. But one detail from that hearing stood out to reporters covering the case. It wasn't something Lawrence said, it was how he behaved. According to journalists inside the courtroom, Lawrence appeared unusually relaxed.
As prosecutors described the final moments of Sierra's life, he reportedly sat rocking back and forth in his chair. For Sierra's family, every new detail made the loss even harder to process. This wasn't simply a woman who had been attacked by a stranger. This was someone who had opened the door to a person she believed she knew, someone she trusted enough to date after years of friendship. And now that trust has ended in the most unimaginable way. As the criminal case moved forward, another question continued to linger. Why had he done it? Why would a friendship that lasted nearly 10 years end like this after only a month of dating? Was it simply rejection? Or had something much darker been building beneath the surface long before Sierra ever agreed to become his girlfriend? The most obvious answer was rejection. After all, their romantic relationship had lasted only about a month before Sierra decided to end it. To many people, that alone explained everything. Lawrence simply couldn't accept that the relationship was over. But when prosecutors and investigators looked at the bigger picture, it became clear that rejection was only one piece of a much larger pattern.
Lawrence's history suggested that violence wasn't something that suddenly appeared after Sierra broke up with him. It had been there for years. His previous arrests and convictions pointed to someone who repeatedly struggled with control, aggression, and managing conflict in healthy ways. Instead of accepting rejection or disappointment, he appeared to respond with intimidation and violence. That pattern didn't begin with Sierra. She simply became its latest victim. It's one of the hardest realities about cases like this. Sometimes the warning signs aren't hidden, they're already there. The problem is that they're often buried in someone's past, overlooked, dismissed, or simply unknown to the people who later become involved with them. In Sierra's case, she had spent nearly 10 years believing she knew Lawrence. She knew him as a friend, someone she could trust, someone she felt safe around. But friendship doesn't always reveal the same parts of a person that a romantic relationship does. It wasn't until they started dating that Lawrence's possessive behavior became impossible to ignore. And once Sierra recognized it, she did exactly what many people would advise someone to do. She left. Unfortunately, leaving doesn't always end the danger. For some abusive partners, it's the moment the danger becomes greatest. For Sierra, that decision to walk away should have been the beginning of a safer chapter in her life. Instead, it became the reason prosecutors believe Lawrence decided to end it. As heartbreaking as Sierra's murder was, the devastation extended far beyond the crime scene. Her 6-year-old son had lost the person who had devoted her entire life to him, the woman who worked tirelessly to provide for him, the mother who proudly spoke about his strength after everything he had already endured. One of Sierra's relatives later summed up what many believed had happened.
He just couldn't take the rejection, so I guess he just took it out in a way he shouldn't have took it out as a man.
As for Lawrence, in December 2025, a Cook County jury found him guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. His sentencing is scheduled to happen after pre-sentencing motions on August 5, 2026. Under Illinois law, first-degree murder carries 20 to 60 years in prison, with possible extended terms of 60 to 100 years or life. Let me know below, and I will see you in the next one.